Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Switzerland ERM regional webinar. We haven't been on for quite a while, but considering all the online webinars, I think that's just fair. On the other hand, today we're coming with a quite interesting topic, and this is about ERM and strategy and how to use them, how to team them up to make an organization's ambitions come true. And with this, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Daniel Imhoff, who is currently Chief Risk Officer of the Swiss Post Group, of which he's going to present his approach. Daniel's CV, if you want, he has an engineering degree of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. He also has a PhD in risk management from Cambridge. And during his work life, he's worked in several areas in risk, safety, and security management. He then was at Roche in the pharmaceutical industry. And since 2019, he's now CEO of the Swiss Post. And also to mention, he was the vice president of the Swiss ERM, another organization in Switzerland who takes care of risk management and brings people together. And I'm very glad about this, he's part of our Swiss regional group board, where we discuss what topics make a lot of sense and help bring Switzerland IRM forward. Just some housekeeping. You will have questions, I'm very sure. I've seen the topic, it's quite interesting. If you have any questions, please use the chat or the question box, and I will then present them after the presentation to Daniel for that he can answer. And with this, to you, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. It's a pleasure indeed to be here today and talk about this topic. It's also pure luck that I'm actually here. My son had an accident at school this morning, and I spent literally the whole day in hospital just to find out what was broken. He has sort of an elbow fracture, and I came back just 10 minutes before this talk. So glad to be here and also to talk about this topic, which is very close to my heart, and where I think risk management really has a value or bringing an additional value to an organization. I structure my talk the following way. I will do a short introduction into Swiss Post. Pretty sure some of you might know what Swiss Post is, but it's not only parcels and mails, as I will explain. It's much more than that. Then I'll talk a little bit in the second part about how we do risk management at the Swiss Post Group, focusing on risk reporting there. And then really come to the core of my talk today, the strategy part, number 3 and 4 here. First, the involvement of risk management in the setting of the new strategy, so the development of the strategy. And then in chapter 4, once the strategy is decided, it needs to be implemented, and here again, risk management plays an important role. And at the end, as Pascal just mentioned before, I'm very happy to take questions. I didn't prepare too many slides, so I have a very brief overview on the topic, but I'm very happy to go into details later on if you have questions. Good. What is Swiss Post Group? It's a postal company like in any other country as well. So we have typically services around mail, number 1 here, and logistics, number 4 that you see here. So parcels, freight, any kind of logistics provision, but also in special areas like medical supplies or temperature controlled supply chain, etc. So this is the traditional part that every postal company has, I guess. But there's more than that. There is, for example, number 2 here, Swiss Post Solutions, which is a business supporting part. So typically smaller and medium-sized companies are using this service where physical things would be scanned, would be made digital. There is content management, there's document management, there's records management, but there's also business process outsourcing in this number 2 here. Then, of course, you have the post offices. So we have physical outlets where people can come with any of the other services for help, for making sure their mail gets to where it should get. And we do this on our own. We have our own outlets, but we also work with many agencies. So you find us in grocery stores, in news agents, in whatever outlet that people use. You can also give your mail parcel, etc. There. Then we have number 5, the PostFinance, which is the biggest retail bank of Switzerland, which has a lot of clients, very large customer base, but typically doesn't fit really with all the other parts. Or I mean, there's connections, but it's really a business of itself. And the same is also true for number 6, Postbus, which is a public transport division where we provide coach services all across Switzerland, typically also in the areas not well deserved by rail. So that shows you it's a company that has very diverse solutions, services, but has one brand. So it's the post organization. If I have a problem with Postbus, I immediately also make the link to the rest of the post organization. So everything is yellow. Yellow is the brand of the post, and everything ties together. So you can not afford to have incidents in just one area without affecting the rest of the group. Then maybe just some facts. I don't want to go too much into details, but when we look at the number of mail and parcels we are sending each year, it's huge for a country that has roughly 8 million inhabitants. We also have around 200 million passengers using our Postbus services in Switzerland. So this really shows it's an important company. It's part of the critical infrastructure of Switzerland. And generally, people are happy with the services they're getting. You see that with the customer satisfaction ratings here. It's a company that is not cheap typically, but it's very reliable. That's what sort of the associations people make with Swiss Post. Interesting also what you see here is these are numbers of 2020. You see some movement compared to 2019. And this has to do, for example, with the uptake of e-commerce, typically resulting in more parcels being sent, plus 29%, as you see here. But it also has to do with Corona, where a lot of people would stay at home, use postal services more and more for the parcels part. The inverse is true for the mail part. There is a steady decline for years now, and this has been accelerated also by Corona. And now you see also the effect on the passengers in public transport. Of course, if people are staying more at home, they're using less public transport. So you see that immediately in the numbers here. In terms of size, we're 40,000 employees, roughly, of which 6,000 are outside of Switzerland. Good. This just to position the post as it is today. And I have chosen this topic because the post is moving to a new post organization, to a new strategy. And I will tell you later in points 3 and 4 how we got there. But I will start with showing you already the result of this new strategy. This is how the post of tomorrow will look like. That's basically the culmination of all the strategy developing work that has been done, showing the end result or the ambition where we want to be in the future. It basically has 2 parts, important parts. On the one hand side, you see that here to the left, it's called Logistic Services. That's a division that basically encompasses the former mail and also the parcel organizations. These were quite 2 completely separate organizations in the past, having their own distribution centers, having their own vehicles, having their own IT tools. Now we're bringing all that together to make sure that we're using the synergies, but also that we sort of compensate the declining mail volumes with increasing parcel volumes. So that's the traditional post as people would know it already in the past, now bundled in one division called Logistics Services. To the right, you see something new. It's basically the same as on the left-hand side. and forgive me if I am making this too simple, but I'm just trying to explain it in a way that everyone can understand it. It's basically bringing the physical services into the digital world. What we do on the left-hand side is we're moving around goods in a physical way, parcels, mail, and we guarantee that what's inside, we have no clue what's inside. So there's a trust, people trust us that we're never opening letters, we're never opening parcels, we deliver that on time, we're reliable. And on the right-hand side, communication services does exactly the same, but with digital information. So it can be any type of information. We're creating here platforms where people come together, customers, but also businesses, small, medium, and also large companies, governmental services, etc. So everything that is digital basically is in this part on the right. And then you see additional parts on top and bottom, where the top part is the postal network. I mentioned before the post offices, which today are only used for our own services. We will open them to third-party services, so you will be able to get into postal offices to have advice on, let's say, health insurance or banking services, even outside of our own bank. And third parties can use our outlets to have a physical presence. That's something that is really appreciated because many companies have skipped their physical presence and then realized, oh, there's still a certain population that wants to have this physical contact, and they now can do it via a third-party provider, that is Swisspost. And at the bottom, mobility services, that's the former Postbus organization, but it's enlarged, and it now really has a focus on sustainable transport. We started moving our fleet here to alternative fuels, and we will do that and continue to do that. And we also will provide mobility services, so not just the coach services, but really from A to Z services that move you all across Switzerland. So that's in a nutshell where we want to go. And you see some parts outside. This is international BPO, business process outsourcing, and the financial services part. So that's former Post Finance part. They have their own strategies, so that in itself they're really big. They develop their strategy independently. So they're just attached to the global strategy, but they're not part of the full corporate strategy. So that's in very short where we want to be in the future. Now the Swiss Post is in attention field. That's why I chose the title here. On the one hand side, it's very heavily regulated. It's 100% owned by the Swiss Confederation, and with that comes a lot of prescriptions, of rules, of things we have to adhere to, and we also have things that the Post Services Commission asks us to do, certain targets that are set that we need to achieve. Same for Office of Communications and the Federal Office of Transport. And often these things that they ask from us are even conflicting. So you can have certain prescriptions from the Federal Office of Transport which go in the opposite direction than the ones from the Federal Office of Communications. So sometimes it's a question about asking ourselves, where is less risk if I'm not adhering or fully compliant with what they're asking us to do. So that's one side. Then because we're publicly, or we're owned by the Swiss Confederation, we're a company that's in the interest of everyone, from the just normal citizen user of our services to the politicians, to the owners, so the Swiss Confederation. There's so many people who just have an opinion on what we should do or should not do, and they voice it also. We're very much in the press. We can do a little thing which people don't understand, and then it gets a huge news story in the press. And I will come to that also on my next slide. We had some unfortunate incidents, as I call them. These are risks that materialized, which didn't help for our reputation, but which helped me as the risk manager of basically people see the interest in risk management much more than another company. I started in Swiss Post 3 years ago, and typically if you were new in a company, you have to defend why you're doing risk management. You have to explain the benefits of risk management. In this company, it was the opposite. There were so high expectations of all the problems that risk management should needs to solve that I had no problem, having the resources, having a certain position in the organization. But I also needed to have something that really added value and was not just a tick box organization. So to summarize this slide, I think risk management, there is certain expectations towards risk management from the owners, but also from the top management of Swisspost towards risk management, and we need to do this right. I was talking about incidents, and when we were putting together these slides, Pascal asked me whether we could not show some of the examples what happened to Swisspost. I put some down here. It's all in German, but I guess you can see what I'm getting at. I think the biggest problem we had in the past was this one here to the left, where the Postbus division, which is to a certain point subsidized by the Swiss government, used these subsidies for other parts of the organization, and that's something clearly that is not allowed. And when this was discovered, this made a huge news story, had a bad effect on the reputation for years, and still has an effect now. But also from a financial perspective, we lost around 200 million Swiss francs just with this case here. So this was a really big blast for ourselves, which still hurts people today. But then we also have had other parts. Here in the middle, you see an attack on a high value transport. So we are also transporting money and high value freight. And they were attacked many times. So that there's organized groups which are specialized in attacking these kind of transports. And this resulted then also in the sell-off of this part of the business. So the second example, and there's plenty of other examples, like also, for example, finding flaws or problems in our digital solutions, like we have an e-voting platform where you can do electronic voting. And when people found that there's certain shortfallings in terms of cybersecurity, this of course is not good. It's not good for that platform, but it's also not good for all the rest we're doing in that space. So just to show you that there is attention from the public, and there's some cases which really helped the risk management function gain in importance. Now we have a normal risk management process which probably is not that different from any other organization. So we're working with the different business units. We're also working with the affiliates. We're bringing all that information together and then report also at group level. That's what you see here. And there we come from two sides. We come from a bottom-up side, and we complement that by a top-down side. First, let's talk about the bottom-up side. We work with the different business units to talk about their risks, but also the opportunities. And often opportunities for us are sort of, or the risks are missed opportunities. Once we know what these risks are, then we talk about where we want these risks to be. And once that is clear, we talk about what sort of risk mitigation we want. We look at different options. We choose the ones that have the best ratio in terms of cost effectiveness. And this is probably what everyone else also does. What is important for us, and I think that's really important, is that we have a second opinion. We're not always sharing the view of the business units. So we report the risk as they were reported by the business units, but then we give an additional view. So things like, we think it's underestimated because of this and this. We know that the probability of occurrence is higher. Or if we don't agree with the way a certain risk is treated, if we think there's not enough action to mitigate certain risk, we will voice that and bring that to discussion at executive committee or board level. But we do also the opposite. If you think a risk has too many risk treatments, which are not in any good relation of cost effectiveness, then we will also voice that. In there, we also have a risk appetite calculation. So we have a qualitative but also a quantitative risk appetite set. We calculate those risk figures, we compare with the appetite, and again, we highlight if there's a need of action or for action to bring the total risk exposure back to the defined risk appetite. So that's just in a nutshell what we're doing. I'm not going into any detail, but I just wanted to highlight that because this is something running. It's not the core of my topic. This is just what was done already before. This was complemented by a top-down, or is always complemented by a top-down view. And we do this using different instruments. First one, we talk to the executive committee to see where would they see their highest challenges, and often that's not exactly the same as what the business sees. We also use our assurance community. That's a community bringing together all the second and third line functions. So functions like compliance, information security, physical security, internal controls, risk management, but also the internal audit function. And this is a community that is under the leadership of the group risk management function, so my function, and we basically exchange information on topics of relevance in all of these areas, but we also optimize the planning of our activities, so not to make it too much as a burden for the units that are visited by us, let's put it that way. Then we also have a risk intelligence process. That's a horizon scanning or emerging risk process that looks at different potential risks that are coming, but not yet so important that they make it into the risk portfolios of the business units. And from these also we can then derive strategic opportunities, but also in the strategy process, there are many things that finally don't make it to the final strategy, but things which we still see as opportunities, we would still raise them and have them also in the group risk report. So that's just very quick on what we would do already in the past. And one example I wanted to share of where it's not just reporting from the business units, it's also intellectual analysis we're doing in my team, is we have certain special topics that we bring to the attention of the executive committee, like this one here from the report that we presented in May last year. So in midst of the Corona crisis, on the very first big waves of Corona crisis, we made an analysis what the new normal could look like after Corona. So right now we know much better how this is, but at the time we made certain hypotheses how this could look like after Corona. And for this we used the pestle analysis. We could use any other type of analysis, but it needs sort of to be a holistic description of the situation. But this is nice, but it doesn't help yet. So we had to, or in the second slide, which I don't show here, we derived risk from that. Because of all these developments that we see coming, what does this mean for Swiss Post? Is there anything that will put a challenge on us that we should maybe mitigate already now? Or on the other side, is there any opportunities that we should pursue? Because there's something to gain. People haven't realized that yet. Maybe we should use that as a competitive advantage. And we had, and actually this analysis came right at the right time, because we were in midst of the strategy development, and we had some points that really could feed then into the strategy development side. So now let's really get into the core of my talk. I have been in plenty of companies and also working as a consultant in risk management, but I've never actually been able to participate in strategy development right from the beginning as a risk manager. And for this, I have to say I'm very lucky that this was the case as Swiss Post. This was a huge opportunity for us to demonstrate also that there is additional value of risk management in being a partner in strategy development. So our role in there was that we anticipate early enough in the process, already when we're just looking at markets that we want to tap in, or different options we should implement, looking at what's the opportunity side, what's the risk side, and this in a very structured manner. For us to be part of this, that needed a certain trust to be built. So I think we were invited to this group, to be part of this group, because we demonstrated that we're a partner that was reliable, can be trusted, and then someone also who can keep confidential information for himself. So we had access to documents, as you see here, to SWOT analysis, to market analysis, and then to new org charts, etc. Things that if you share it once with the rest of the organization, then you're out, and then you will never be back again. So I think it was really important that I made this clear also to my team. What you see there stays there. It's Chatham House rules. It's even more important than that. And if someone doesn't want to do that, or cannot promise to do this, you're better not involved. So I think that's the first point here. It was very important that we keep everything that is confidential, really confidential. Then on the second point, I didn't want my team to be seen as someone who's always challenging or seeing plenty of obstacles and hindering basically that we go into more innovative solutions. So I think it was important that we gave constructive feedback, that we helped, that we sort of voiced our opinions also on topics not necessarily directly related to risks. And important, you see that later on here on this slide, is that we also always looked also at solutions, not only see the problems, but also think of what could we do, what are the different options. And maybe the last point also to highlight here is often in those situations, it gets a little bit blurry. We could do this, we could do this, we could do this. Let's do halfway, or etc. What we tried always to do is put things black and white. So if you have multiple options, you try to combine them to option A, B, C, and for each of these you describe what are the pros, what are the cons, what does this mean in terms of costs, in terms of risk, and then you can directly compare the three options, and at the end you're there to take a decision. You take I, B, or C, but you cannot take half A or half B and a little bit of D, and maybe I'll kill it anyway later on. Once you make it black and white, then it's much easier for people to take a decision. So what I put down here, maybe it comes a little bit unstructured, but it's sort of the lessons learned from the process. Then also, because this was the first time we actually did something like that, we had no track record or experience or any best practice we could tap into. So we had to develop a lot of things ourselves. And it started with things like a template for risk identification. We learned that we cannot just take what we use in the normal risk management process and then it will work also on this side. We had to adapt things to make it more look like strategy processes, like financial processes. And we always had to ask ourselves, what do you want with this? At the end of the day, what are you using this template for? Is that something to know of rich A, B, C, which one is the more important? So a relative positioning, or is it a quantitative assessment of risk, which later on you could even put into your financial planning? And depending on what you're after, you need a different sort of template. And that's something we realized as we moved along. But at the very beginning, we tapped into walls many times and we did a lot of things wrong. But it also helped us to develop and get better, of course. Then maybe a word how this was done in a post group. Typically in post group in the past, the different divisions would do their strategy. And at the end, there was a corporate strategy defined that combined the strategies of the individual units. But this time, this was done the other way around. There was a small group put together to develop a corporate strategy. And once this was clear, the different units were asked, now you build your strategy basically to make the corporate strategy happen. And so we had different work packages looking at different markets, all with a leader that chaired this package. and made of people who had an interest in developing strategy, not necessarily the people at the management team level, but people really down in the organization who knew their business, but also had a keen interest of developing the new strategy. And those people were taking off their normal business for around 6 months. They were put into a room which was closed, no one else could enter, and develop their really creative new ideas. And we were very happy to be part of this right from the beginning. And we were not just there as a risk manager. They didn't want to have a risk manager at the table. They wanted people who challenged them, who gave them input, or gave them a certain opinion on something. And I think that it was really our role there. We were not the risk managers there. We were just part of the team. So we were developing the strategy with all the other representatives. And again, I'm now speaking not only for risk management, for the whole team, we had to change ways of working all the time. This was really agile, and I don't use it because it's nice to use it in the presentation. It was really that way. It was flexible enough. Something didn't work, try it differently. Something worked, make it even better. This approach there. And then, terms of risk reporting, we try to be very close to what we do for normal project risk. We also support our project management teams with risk management. And here what we used is a very similar reporting, so that people who read the report at the end didn't need an explanation on how this all works, but they could immediately spot where are the points that they needed to be aware of. Then based on the individual work packages risk, we also did an overall risk view. And here again, we didn't reinvent the wheel. There we could take how we do things at group level in the risk management process. For me, important was always that this needs to be understandable. It needs to be in a language that gets straight to the point, that everyone can understand. But you can also immediately see where action is needed. You don't want to explain the whole situation, all risks in detail. You want to focus where it really matters, where decisions need to be taken, where maybe additional monitoring is needed. And then finally, it also fed into financial planning. So in the financial plan, we typically have an expected scenario with figures, but to this we then also added a risk scenario, and with probabilities at each scenario, we could then calculate the expected outcome in terms of sales, in terms of profit, etc., and make very good predictions of where we could land at, and from that derive what our ambitions should be. So all in all, something that adapted all over time, and it's one practice. I also have to say it's not the best practice, not yet. There's still a long way to go for that. But we made the first steps, we changed it, and I think, again, I was very happy that we were allowed to be part of this. So at the end of this, the strategy was developed. I showed you the outcome of the strategy before, and now we had to make sure that we continue to be on track, that we can reach this ambition at the given times. So we knew where to go, we knew what to do. All the different units had their plans how to get there, but we also had to look what are the obstacles on the way there. Is there anything we should do right now so that the obstacles have less effect, etc. So a traditional risk assessment, but in this case here for the pure transformation. So a lot of change management risks that occurred here. We started to do this, what we call transformation risk assessment, by talking to the executive committee and the board of directors to see sort of where would they see the highest challenges. Is there a need of doing things differently? We were a lot of topics we were talking about also in the area of culture. We need to change the culture. You know, this is a traditional, very big company in Switzerland, not used to shocks. And now we had to move to a system where speed, where courage, etc., is much more important than in the past. Then in the second step, we were doing similar discussions, but now with top management and middle management. And we did this with surveys. Once we had the result of the surveys, we would then go into interviews to understand it even better and to see where are sort of the areas where we need to still work on. And one of the main results there was that people really understood why transformation was needed. So I think this was critical. So if people don't understand why you're doing this, then you're lost right from the beginning. But this was clear. People who understood we have to do something, and the plan there is good. So this was clear. But the middle management also saw a lot of challenges in different fields to the way there. From this, we derived solutions, how we could address those challenges. We defined overarching risk mitigation packages, which then we also monitored on a regular basis. And I will just show you how we did this. So to do these interviews, we first had to come up with a kind of a risk catalog for change management risks. This is not something that we already had, so we had to develop it. You see some of it here. I'm not going to share everything because this took us quite some time, and we're proud of the development that was put into this. But it was in these areas. You see areas around leadership in the times of change, around really maximizing the value, the motivation of the organization, the whole monitoring, supporting, orchestrating of the process. And finally, we had plenty of bigger initiatives that needed to be realized. So it is a question of project management, portfolio management of projects, etc. So we asked then, we had different statements or text that goes with all these different categories here. And people had to judge whether there was high risk or low risk in these areas. And we then produced these curves that you see here to identify which of these areas really had the highest risk associated with. So that was the first thing. We wanted to know which ones, and you see here this one to the left, of course, are the ones with the highest risk. But then also we discovered that there was a discrepancy between how executive committee, here that's the light gray line, judged the challenges compared to middle management. We would have expected that there's gaps, but some of these gaps were really so important that we needed to understand more. Why is it, for example, that adequate capacity, here we're talking about resources. Do we have the right resources in terms of numbers, but also in terms of competencies? Why is it that executive committee thinks this is not a problem versus middle management thinks there's a huge challenge with this? So in the interviews, we would dig deeper and then try to understand what sort of elements were contributing to the assessment that was done in the survey. We collected this. This is one example here in the space of leadership. We collected it in the interviews, but not only the problems or the challenge side, but also what sort of things come to your mind when you would have to address those topics. What would you do? And we collected this information. So for example, in terms of leadership culture, we could do workshops, we could move away from implementers to leaders, we could increase the presence of the executive committee, and so on. We collected those ideas, and then based on that input, we would formulate certain packages of risk treatment, which then we discussed with the executive committee, and they decided on 5 of those. There was more than 5 proposed, but they said those 5 we really want to implement, and we want this person to be owner of these actions. And from then on the risk management side, we would monitor this. Does this package, is this the implementation of this package on track? Is it delivering on the value that it was supposed to add, etc. So it really showed that it's not only people bringing the problems or the challenges at the table and then leave it to the other side to respond, but it showed that risk management has certain ideas, has certain solutions, has best practice, maybe from one side of the business that could also be used in other business units. And so it was not only a seeker of problems, but also a solution provider. And I think that is is quite a mindset change for us in the area of risk management. And here you see how we reported this. There was a transformation management office, which basically steered the whole transformation of the old strategy to the new strategy. And as part of that, we were responsible for the risk management reporting. And you see here how this was done. On the left-hand side, you see the major risks that were identified at a certain point, following exactly how we do reporting in our normal risk management process. So for instance, you see certain risks are more financial, the blue ones here, others more having an effect on the reputation with the yellow line, etc. So it's exactly the same way people are used to in all the other reportings you're using in risk management. And then on the right-hand side, you see those 5 packages I was alluding to that were defined in order to mitigate certain risks that were anticipated with the most important content of it, and an owner at the end. So the person that's the go-to person, but it's also the person that is responsible that these things are put in place in the given timeline. And later on in the process, we would then also raise here critical themes, challenges, things that we would identify hindering basically the implementation of the things that you see to the left. Or and with this also maybe sometimes raising the point that we should maybe change the way we're tackling this problem, add something else, or also kick certain of these elements out. Good. And this brings me to the last slide. I was taking a little bit longer than I expected, but fine. 3 key lessons that I would want to share with you. The first one is, I think as a risk management, we need to contribute to success. We are not hindering. We're basically the ones enabling the performance, the reaching of the ambitions, etc. So that is also needed in the risk reporting. Risk reporting is not just a consolidation or a summary of everything that was reported somewhere, a list of risk. No, it's something that needs to have opinions, a view, maybe not shared with the beliefs of the rest or of some of the business units, but we have to have our own position. It needs input from various sources. It needs analysis. It's not just as I said before, that we put down in one report everything that we collected elsewhere. It needs intellectual thinking. Second point is in this kind of collaboration, now with strategy, risk management together, when things are not standardized yet, or maybe it will never be, we have to reinvent instruments again and again. But we have to not forget what is it really we're shooting for, and focus really on that, because there's plenty of things we could do just because it's nice to do. We could collect a lot of information, do plenty of data analysis, but if you don't know what you're using that for, then it's also all useless. So focus is very important here. And maybe also another thing is the same tool maybe doesn't work in all areas. And I realized when working with different groups and with different kind of people, sometimes you need different approaches. And here's is a list of things that we used in that context. We did interviews, we did Delphi sessions. For those of you who don't know this, you do things with subgroups. They get results, you show it to the others. They adapt their results until the result really gets much better quality. You can do surveys, as I showed before. You can do just checklists. Have you thought about this? Have you by this you already do risk mitigation? You can use polls, etc. There's plenty also of tools that we realized existed because we were in home office that really helped achieving your targets here. But I think what's important here is to know, don't stick where you have always be, change, adapt, make it even better in the future. And then the last bit, and I said it already multiple times today, I was very lucky. I really appreciated to be on board from the beginning. But in order to still be kept as a partner, you need to first build the trust, but then also maintain the trust. And you have to deliver outside of your home territory. And when I say that, I mean, we're risk manager, that's our role, but we also have an opinion as a normal citizen, as someone who has read the newspaper, or etc. You have an opinion, you also voice that opinion. You give something back, you come with solutions, and that makes you, as a representative of your risk management function, even more attractive in the collaboration. So that are my 3 points. And my last point here is, or lessons learned. My last point is really the skills of the risk manager that we need. And this was probably already like this in the past, but maybe we didn't realize it yet. But we need people who are very curious in all sorts of areas, and especially in working in the strategy field. You cannot just stick to what the business that has always been done. You need to be interested in any type of thing that is going on in the world of today. You need to be versatile because you have to adapt your instruments, the ways you're doing things, but also the way you report, that you ask people, that you insist, that needs to be different. You need to be flexible, adapt. I said that before, and you need to be very well networked. Networked inside the company, right from the admin staff to the people delivering the mail. So our post guys really confronting the customers, that is super input. And also with management, but not only with management. I think you need to be networked all across the organization. And you also need to be networked outside, because only then you get the signals that you need to challenge the strategy being put forward. So with this, I end my presentation. I hope I didn't bother you too much. For me, this is a very passionate subject, as you can see. We're still at the very beginning, but we've learned a lot in this journey. Thank you very much. Now I'm
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for sharing these insights on your strategy approach. Obviously, you learn on the journey, but it looks like it's well thought through from the offset. I just wonder, because I haven't seen this approach before. I think it's quite good if you develop the strategy. Considering that risk management is involved, that parts of the organization are involved in strategy development, how did you convince your board of this approach?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I cannot really answer it because you know, I was not at Swiss Post for so long time. I only be here 3 years ago, but probably it had to do because I showed these examples of the scandals or the cases with Postpass, etc. That there was a certain expectation for risk management, and when I came in, I changed some of the processes in a different way so that people really can understand what they're doing, that make them very practical, that everyone, even if you're not a specialist, can understand what you're saying. And I think it was that aspect which made the board think, or they have seen it works, it's reliable, it's understandable, maybe they should have a seat at the table. So I think this was built up beforehand. It was not just built, the trust was not just built up because we wanted to be part of it. We were actually asked without even saying something before. So maybe it was just luck. Yeah, not 100% sure what the actual reason was.
I can imagine that any risk manager would be delighted to be part of this. Just for the audience, please raise your questions that you have to Daniel in either the questions or the chat. I will pass them on to Daniel. Meanwhile, maybe I have tons of questions, but like considering the setting of this strategy development, how did you pick, or how were the contributors from the organization picked?
Yeah, so this was a special process I've never seen somewhere else before again. And maybe, you know, maybe I'm just not aware, but I haven't seen it yet. This was a task given to all the leadership teams to identify people within their ranks, but not from the leadership team level. This was specifically asked that it's not someone who's already now on the leadership team. So there were some very young people, you know, people who have been there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, but had had this ambition or had this, some people really want to form or shape something, and if they could demonstrate that, they were taken. They were not necessarily always the people who have been the longest with the company or had the deepest insights. We had representatives also from that space. It was a good mix, but basically the management team was asked to come up with names from within their organization, and people could then say that they wanted to be picked, and finally it was a mix that was retained.
And it appears like it is quite some effort, picking everyone from the organization, bringing them together. Was this now a one-off activity, or is it foreseen to redo the exercise frequently?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either. It was definitely a one-off exercise to develop this strategy. So this is a strategy until 2030. So a longer-term strategy. There will be reviews of the strategy for sure, but I'm not sure whether they will create again this small group who will do that. Maybe, but I cannot tell you.
Okay. And now, from a time frame perspective, what range from a strategy perspective? Was it like a short-term, mid-term, long-term perspective? What's the idea of the exercise?
It started with a longer-term vision. So as I said, 2030, and basically we started with looking at, if we continue like we are now, what would that mean? What would be our financial results, say, in 2030? And then we would look at different options to see, is there any improvement compared to if it just continue as it is today or not? And then once it was clear that we want to go into this direction for 2030, then we came with a more detailed plan for the shorter term. So there the perspective was until 2024. 3 years.
And now, you can't do it from a retro perspective, of course, but I mean, risk management is about taking better decisions. If you would review what you've done, would you consider this exercise led you to making better decisions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the biggest advantage was that we sort of made the decisions much earlier. Now, in the past, we had plenty of examples where, for example, we would embark on a new business idea. And then 2 years later, we realized, oh, we're not getting where we are at. Maybe we should try it again. Let's give it this tweak. 5 years later, you realize you're still burning money. Nothing comes out of it. And you're doing the risk management afterwards. Now, in each of the decisions, we were looking proactively what are the things that could happen. And we were also working a lot with event trees, for example. We could have this with a certain probability, then this, then this, and this. And with this, we also introduced certain gates. If this doesn't happen, project over. Things like that, if we had put them in place beforehand, I think we would have lost less money. I think that was one thing. The other thing I also would mention to answer your question is, because we were a lot involved in M&A activities as part of this strategy, and we still are. There were a lot of gates also when we were selling something. We were not only looking at bringing in new stuff into the organization, but also getting rid of the areas where we really don't see a future. And in the past, again, was very political. So you would keep those things for ages. And now we put them really black and white, so that they had to take a decision. Either you're going to burn money, and the number is this, or you do this and this now, that costs you this, and eventually you'll get out this, but it's maybe still not a good option. Or you sell it now, you lose your reputation for a certain time, but you build it back by getting into more attractive space. So putting things black and white. Yeah.
Sounds like a good example of really doing risk and opportunity management in combination.
Yeah.
We have a few questions from the audience. So one is, do you use Monte Carlo simulation in your approach?
We do to calculate the risk portfolio at the very top level. So not at the individual unit levels, but at the very top. We basically look at the risk exposure over the whole company We have also certain criteria in terms of risk appetite, risk-bearing capacity, liquidity, but also benefit of or benefit versus risk ratios that we're looking at. And for this, we need Monte Carlo simulation, yes.
But this didn't flow into like this exercise,
no,
right?
No, not on the strategy side, not at all. And that's what I said at the very beginning. We had to be very careful to really come up with those instruments that in this context made sense. And you know, when you look at different markets, for example, at the very beginning, it's very hard to come up with numbers. And an assessment with just medium, high, low qualitatively is fair enough, or is good enough in order to, you know, make a relative prioritization where you have your risks. I don't think at this level of detail or maturity, it makes sense to really do a lot of quantitative analysis.
Another question, bringing this into the humanitarian area. So the question is, how would you define the strategy to make an organization's ambitions come true in an emergency humanitarian operation? Oh, that's a tough one.
Maybe we have to think here about the two sides. On the one hand side, it's really the development side, where we also as a humanitarian organization, you want to clearly define in what space you want to tap in, where you see the biggest effect. And here it's maybe not the financial effect, but really from the humanitarian side, where can you gain most? Is it by getting directly on the field, or is it by indirectly influencing somewhere? Or you have to sort of do the whole or look at the whole spectrum of where you can have a certain effect. And here comes in risk and opportunity management. Again, you look at what this is an attractive field, but it has this and this risk, and you can gain this and this. And from this, you can then look at different options and decide where should we focus on. What's our strategy for our NGO or humanitarian organization? And then once that is clear, it's exactly what I showed in chapter 4 here. It's basically you know where the direction is, you know the path, but you know also that there's obstacles to there, and you want to not get rid of these obstacles, but maybe diminish them or diminish the effect of them. And you want to do that proactively, not just when it happens then react. So I think from an approach wise, it's quite similar in the second part. In the first part, it's more looking at the effect that you get from a humanitarian perspective. I would say my sense of this.
Thank you. There's another question. Thanks for the presentation. Can you share a snapshot of the risk template you use? I think since this question was earlier, I think you had shown one template on how you can provide kind of the risk overview on one of these slides. If you want the slides, then please send a message to the webinars@irm.org so that we can provide these slides if Daniel is okay with this.
I'm okay, yeah, no problem.
Just one last question, considering the time. It's a hen and egg question. With regards to objectives, like your company objectives, did these objectives flow into the strategy, or did you develop the strategy and then define the objectives?
It's a difficult one, because on the one hand side, we have objectives that are given to us by the owner. So the Swiss Confederation asks us, for example, that we have to provide mail to every Swiss household on time in 97% of every mail is distributed. So there are certain things we had as fixed as an objectives. These are non-negotiable if you want. But then when you decide or pick your strategy, and especially also when you pick the areas you're not yet in and you want to sort of enter a new market, then first you have to know what you're about. What is it that you're developing? If you give you one example, we want to go into the area of digital health, so providing, for example, electronic patient records. That is something we're not yet active in. But you have to develop this market. There's certain potential. You know, there's certain benefits to different stakeholders. You want to formulate that first, what you want to achieve, and only then you come with certain parameters that you can, or KPIs or whatever you call them, to basically monitor whether you're on track to achieve the overall ambition that you have at the end of the day. So I think to answer your question, both sides. There are certain objectives that were set right from the beginning that we have to fulfill, and others just came out of the strategy that was defined.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Daniel. We ran out of time. I'm sure we would have way more questions. I think it was very interesting to see this approach. I haven't seen this before. So therefore, thank you very much for sharing. Thank you everyone for attending. And just a bit of advertisement for our next webinar. So in December, we're going to run another webinar that's on sustainability risk management. So I look forward to seeing you all, and have a good evening. Thank you. Bye.
Good evening. Bye-bye.